Hey everyone, welcome to Intro to Gender and Media. I'm Alicia Swizz. I am reading this book, looking at this book, The Lolita Effect, which is what this section covers. And you can get this book at your local feminist bookstore and also other places on the internet probably. The author, Gigi Durham, is a PhD and professor. This says University of Iowa, but this was published a while ago, so to get updated on where Dr. Durham's at now. But she is one of the experts that you see commenting in Misrepresentation. If you haven't watched that yet, that's one of the viewings recommended for this section or for this course. And Misrepresentation, most of the authors you're reading are also featured in that documentary. So it's a great crossover. And in it, Durham comments on all of the things she touches on in this book. This book is, I would say, an essential part of a feminist canon if you're interested in pop culture, media, and specifically teens and young girls. So if you are an educator or like raising teenagers, but really it applies to everyone. So Durham wrote a academic paper. She published her own research under the same title, The Lolita Effect. That's also one of your readings. And then from that, she developed this book. And what's cool about the book is she kind of boils it down to these 5 components that we see replicated in the media that create the Lolita Effect, which goes by lots of other names and terms too. This isn't something that hasn't been discussed in multiple areas of academia, from just sociology and psychology to development of our species. But what she does is she looks at, again, these 5 main components and then really how we can target them and start fixing and responding to, especially when it comes to the media. And part of what this class does, and what as a student hopefully you're interested in, is becoming an active, what we'd call consumer of the media, an active agent of the media, someone who participates and thinks critically in what they're ingesting, as opposed to just watching in a passive way, being like a passive consumer of media, someone who just takes it in without thinking, without questioning, without at least having an awareness of how it's affecting you, because it is. Okay, so I assigned for the book, for this class, chapter 7 from this book, which is towards the end, because chapter 7 goes more into the media specifically and what she calls the seducers and this spectacle of media that's built off of myths. And if you're not sure what we mean by that, a myth is, this mythology, obviously, but it's this story we tell ourselves. And it's not true. It's a figment of our imagination. It's created, but in its most positive sense of the word, myths are there to help us, comprehend the experiences that we're having, give meaning to things, weave together a tale that can then inform, morality in some sense. What she's arguing is that these myths that we create around girls and women specifically are more detrimental. They're created with the intent of men and men's pleasure and basically the exploitation of women and what they offer as autonomous, human beings. Okay, so just to go over really quickly, the 5, I'm just going to read it straight from the book, the 5 myths of the Lolita Effect, which these all come up again in the PowerPoint slides you've got, are, if you've got it, flaunt it, but don't flaunt it unless you're like a sex goddess, a total babe. The younger you are, the better. That's 2. Make sure you're flaunting it in a way that boys like it. 4, if you spice it up with a little bit of violence, use so much the better. Is that not 5? Anyway, so she talks about how these myths and these ideologies are what the media uses to create this spectacle, this idea. And spectacles in the media are this mix of messages and, kind of fantasy and all the things that we want to celebrate about the media. It's escapism, the ways we can see these bigger, better versions of ourselves. But they're also like completely professionally done and executed and created to most of the time sell something, if not a specific product, an idea, an image, a feeling. So what Durham is doing is reminding us that the way that we sell men and women this idea of what women are, of what sex is, of what sexuality is affecting all of us negatively. And she really is looking at how it affects girls and also how girls are having an awareness of it and having to negotiate it. And so, she goes through body image, just the idea of female figure, ideal female beauty, and accepted beauty standards, which in America are always, the quick answer is Barbie, even as that fluctuates because we're seeing it diversified. There's still this norm that pervades, this is why people straighten their hair, lighten their skin. That's why the makeup industry is what it is. She talks about the ways that we build this youth culture into beauty and femininity specifically, and that is where the Lolita effect really starts to flourish, is in this age gap, which we also see in Hollywood, and the Women's Media Center report that you looked at pointed to as well. And then we see the way it starts affecting women, and what women then do is self-objectify and internalize these myths that the media creates around who and what they should be. And then the way that starts to parlay out into the culture is women then also defining as this limited and oftentimes degrading version of themselves. There's ways to reclaim and find power in this too, but the argument is, in the world we live in, and especially in the constructs of the media, which is still hyper dominated by men in all facets and areas, what Durham is arguing is that we need to start taking control of these narratives to disrupt these myths that simply say women and young girls are only available and to be utilized in a certain way that sees them only as sexual objects, not beings. The difference between a sexual object and a sexual being is not something she goes into too deeply, but is something that is a big piece of the puzzle, and that this object and being is the place to just kind of maintain the simplest definition. An object is inanimate, is not a human, doesn't have feelings, and is treated in the ways that we treat things that are not alive. But to be a being is to be living, to be feeling, to be a human being is to have a certain level of involvement around skills and communication and experience in the world. So to be a sexual object is to be used for someone else's sexual choices. To be a sexual being is to have your own sexual choices, freedoms, behaviors. And it's a whole nother class on why women are not, and girls are not allowed to be or given free space to be sexual beings. They've only been objectified. So the Lolita effect does go into that to a certain extent. But really she's looking at the way the media hypersexualizes girls, and one of the ways we can see that is simply through the kind of clothes that are being sold in mainstream places. The whole leggings debate would even fall under the Lolita effect, where girls are being punished for wearing leggings because it's distracting to boys. This is a way of sexualizing young girls for the most part. because adult women, you shouldn't care what they're wearing anyway. But when teen girls are being sent home from school or being punished or being kicked off airplanes for wearing leggings, that's an example of the Lolita effect in the real world, saying we only see you as sexual objects and this is an inappropriate way to be seen. So we're blaming you and we're putting rules and limitations on who and how you're to exist in the world, instead of asking ourselves why we're only perceiving girls in this hypersexualized and objectified way. Yeah. Um, yeah. I think if you have any questions, shoot an email. There's some images and a couple other videos in the PowerPoint. And this one, I feels, I think a lot of it's going to make a lot of sense to you pretty quickly once you start reading. All right, enjoy.